Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one I basically just want to talk about the current situation we're in with regards to having no new books announced outside of Katara and the Pirate Silver going forward. That we're waiting on a bunch of announcements that haven't happened yet and speculating about, I suppose, what those announcements should be, maybe potentially when we might expect them. Pretty much just, I suppose, my last time discussing a lot of the sort of speculation on the next batch of books before the news actually comes out. So, yeah, the fandom definitely is in a sort of frustrated position at this point because we have been waiting just months, basically, for the next announcement. Like, pretty much since Runes of the Empire ended, we were just kind of like, okay, what's next for Korra comics? We know there is a book coming. That Rachel Roberts confirmed there is another Korra book or potentially books to be announced, but it hasn't happened yet. So they also in one of the Turf Wars live streams did kind of double down on the idea that there is other Avatar books waiting to be announced. So what's going on basically? What should they be? And it all pretty much comes back to this completely like innocuous book if this happened at like any other period of the Avatar comics, this would just be like, cool, we have this extra book, Katara and the Pirate Silver. But because it is like the only new comic announcement in the last like year and a bit, it's become this sort of, you know, signal to the fandom of just like, this is Dark Horse Comics wrapped up in one book. The fans have been extraordinarily clear about the time periods, the characters, the stories that we want from the comics, and the next book that you announce is this one. Solo Katara book set during ATLA, and not even that interesting of a period of ATLA, it seems. It's just like, what? It completely has sort of derailed the kind of release cadence we've had of a certain understanding that this is how things are done with the comics. They do it trilogy by trilogy, and each trilogy constantly expands into the sort of comic era of Avatar, where it is our characters post ATLA getting older to bridge the gap to Korra. And now all of a sudden we're going backwards. And it's the same creative team that did the last trilogy, but now they're working on a one-shot book. Wait, where are we? And of course, since that announcement, months and months and months have passed with only like minor teases of like, there's a Korra book coming, and we're still incredibly confused about Avatar comics. So I suppose let's speculate about the one thing we know. We are getting another Korra book. If you aren't aware of like why I'm sort of so confident about this, it's because in the aftermath of Runes of the Empire Part 3 releasing, there was an interview that included Rachel Roberts, who is the editor on the Avatar and Korra books for Dark Horse. And in that interview, in an answer to a question about, you know, basically what can fans look forward to after this, she basically just said, you know, fans of both Avatar and Korra will have, you know, books to look forward to. We're trying out like different formats and stuff like that. I can't remember the exact wording, but formats was said, and then Avatar and Korra was said. This was prior to Katara and the Pirate Silver being announced, so you can maybe say that the Avatar book that she mentioned was Katara and the Pirate Silver, but that means that no Korra book has been announced. You can also maybe say that the format aspect of what she said was covered also with Katara and the Pirate Silver being a one-shot, but there hasn't been a new Korra book announced, because I think we already knew about the Runes of the Empire Library Edition, and then the only other Korra book announced is like a reprint of the Book 1 Air art book from Dark Horse. So that definitely isn't what she was talking about. So the question is, what type of book is the Korra book going to be, and, you know, what should we expect from it? Because if Katara and the Pirate Silver wasn't a thing, we would go into the expectation about a new Korra book just being like, yeah, for sure, 100%, it's a new trilogy. It's going to be our third Korra comic trilogy. Turf Wars, Ruins of the Empire, this one. But just that one book throws this up into the air, where it could be a Korra solo book, for all we know. It could be a trilogy. It could be a two-parter, three-parter, four-parter. We don't know. It might not even be a comic. It might even be some sort of other type thing. Like that's how sort of vague of a situation we're actually in, and we have no information. Like from what I've seen, there's been no speculation or hints anywhere about the creative team for this book, so we don't know if Michelle Wong's going to be sticking on board. We definitely for sure don't know if Mike is going to remain on as the writer, just because the Netflix show is a thing, and it will be, I suppose, ramping up production, I suppose, over the next year or two, and it'll eventually happen whenever, I guess. But that definitely puts his role on these comics up in the air. So are we just in a transition point where we just need a lot of new creative team members? Because it feels like they've sort of transitioned Peter Wortman and Faith Erin Hicks away from trilogies into doing something different, but we don't know. And that's where, in terms of poor communication, that's what they've done here. They have announced a new book, which should be an amazingly positive thing. But the main takeaway, rather than just excitement for that book, has been confusion about your entire line of products, basically, and expectations and what we should look forward to or not, or whatever. Now, as for my speculation on the next Korra book, I think it will be a trilogy. And the reason I say that is because I think it's still so early in Korra comics that there's no way they've sort of ran out of ideas. I'd be shocked if they ended Korra comic trilogies after just two. Especially given that Ruins of the Empire it by no means is like an ending point for anything. So to me, they definitely would want to do at least a third comic trilogy. But again, there's always that potential that it might be a solo book. But I think it's probably a little too early. But at the same time, I also think about the fact that we have these two short stories out there for Korra, Friends for Life and Lost Pets, that just only exist in the sort of free comic book day environment, where they're single issues that you could only get on that one day, or it's a digital download. There's no collected edition for those two short stories or anything like that. There's going to, at some point for Korra, have to, I suppose, be a short story collection, or a one-shot book that you can collect together with those two to release in a proper edition. But I think we're still a little bit away from that. So I do think for Korra comics, especially given how much they've sort of focused on like Turf Wars and the live readings and stuff like that, I'd be shocked if they switched up the format too crazily for the next Korra comic. That's why I think it is definitely a trilogy. The question then becomes, what should the trilogy be about? And this is where I suppose it gets up into the air of, I suppose technically it could actually be a sequel to either of the first two comics. It could be a sequel to Ruins of the Empire, by just being another Kuvira sort of centric book of like, now that she's home back with her family, how do things change? And you have it be just a more character driven book, and maybe a side plot happen with someone else. It could be a sequel to Turf Wars and return to the plot of the Spirit Portal. What have the Airbenders done with the Spirit Portal area now that they sort of have been given this land? How is the relationship with the spirits over the last few months? And that's a major point that is going to have to be tackled quite heavily in Korra's time period. Tokuga, we know, got away at the end of Turf Wars. He is going to return at some point, but what's he actually going to be about? He might be more interesting in his return than he was in the first book. But I think it's perhaps a little too soon to do that, because I don't think that many people are jumping at the opportunity to have Tokuga return. So I do think they will want to do something more unique. And everyone wants it to be Korra finally going to the Fire Nation, And I think you can just create any situation that just requires her to go there and people will be happy with it, because you'll be covering characters who we don't have a lot of attention on, like Izumi. I suppose General Iroh might be able to come back into things. Zuko, of course, and it might be the debut of Izumi's daughter, which I think is a character people want to be introduced, I suppose, properly into canon, and just to have another interesting character. So once they can create some sort of a plot around going to the Fire Nation, to me that's the go-to thing. Of you immediately counteract a lot of people's maybe negativity towards just Dark Horse recently by delivering on, this is what you wanted for Korra, isn't it? Yes, it is. So to me, they're your options, is that you either have to focus on what the Air Nomads are doing with the new portal, or you have Korra go to the Fire Nation. Beyond that, it's probably just something that no one would be able to predict. I think stories that are needed, characters that need attention, would be Mako 100% needs to get a focused story. I think that can happen if they go to the Fire Nation. Asami needs a focused story as well. That is not just her being in a relationship with Korra, but that is properly about her. Fire Nation, I suppose, theoretically could be that story, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd always speculated that you create some sort of a plot surrounding either what happened to Asami's mother or Mako and Bolin's parents and the people group who killed them. Like, might there even have been a connection between both of them or whatever? Especially because Mako's a cop. That's always felt like a way to do things, of like cover for both characters their mothers who we don't know a lot about. So for Asami, Yasuko, that would be really nice to get some attention on her and see what aspects of Yasuko Asami has. And then for Mako and Bolin, their mother Naoki, what she was like, because we saw the father's side of the family, but what's the Fire Nation side of the family like? That's that option. And then I suppose beyond that, it's just character-wise, like I'd like to see stuff like Jinora and Kai get a little bit more focus, which you can do as part of an Airbender plot. Bolin has his arc of just, I guess, politics is potentially his path at this point, but it's sort of unclear. That to me feels like more of a long-term arc rather than the next book is going to be Bolin finding his way. That's just going to be something in the background that happens. It's very difficult to predict, I think, really exactly what way they'll go, because as much as it seems so obvious to go to the Fire Nation, it's also the case where it feels like Dark Horse do everything they can just to not give fans sort of like exactly what they want. That's what Katara and the Pirate Silver just feels like to the fan base, of just, you gave us exactly the things we didn't want. Set during ATLA, a book that seems on the outside right now to be utterly not important and just confusing, lack of communication, just all those things, just taking us away from the timeline we want to go backwards and all that sort of stuff. It's very, very backwards. The other stories that we want would be probably better told in maybe solo books and so on, and that is stuff like Red Lotus backstory, backstory for other characters and so on, which I suppose brings up the idea of like, okay, what's next for Avatar comics? Because, you know, we're not that far away from Katara and the Pirate Silver. It's about 3 months away at this point, meaning that in about a month or so, I suspect we'll be getting preview pages for this book. And then once we're close to that coming out, the question is immediately going to be, we waited ages for this one-shot book, what is afterwards? Are we returning to trilogies? Are we doing another one-shot book? What's the situation? Because, again, creative teams are up in the air. I don't know if Peter Wortman and Faith Erin Hicks are still working on Avatar comics, or Katara and the Pirate Silver was their last one as such. They just seem to not really be talking about it all that much, if they are working on anything for Avatar or not. To me, it seems kind of clear at this point that if we are sticking with the same creative team, we are not going to get the Azula story that we all want. It just seems like Faith Erin Hicks is very unwilling to write that story, or seemingly anything of note, really, within the franchise. You have to keep in mind what she said at the convention about, I suppose, Azula fans and her view on writing Azula, basically. And I don't think that's going to change. I think the fact that since she said that at the convention, the next book that she's working on for Avatar is Katara and the Pirate Silver, I think tells you sort of everything you need to know. So we're probably looking to, like, unless we get new creative team announced, it's not going to be the book that we really want. So if it is going to be another Faith Erin Hicks and Peter Wortman book, I do think it is going to be another one-shot. The reason I say that, and I think that we will get more of these one-shots as we go forward, is just because of them being collected together at some point. If this Katara book just remains as the one and only just single graphic novel, it means that, like, there's very few options for them to ever reprint it as like a library edition. So to me, it probably is quite likely that there is at least one or two more one-shots planned. Then they can collect the whatever it is, 3-4 one-shots together into a library edition, and it's like a short story collection, but it's a one-shot collection of like longer short stories. That seems like something that they will want to do at some point. I can maybe see them doing like 3 one-shot books, and then you collect sorry, I'm mixing up Avatar and Korra there, but yeah, something like that is probably what they'll do. So for that creative team, whatever comes next is probably something like a, you know, Sokka one-shot story or something like that. Which asks the question then, what's next for basically post-Imbalance? Because as much as maybe I think a direct sequel to Imbalance is not what we need, the storyline in general following Imbalance is what we need to cover again. Because we need to get back to Azula at some point. And until we, I think, wrap up Azula in this era, like basically over the next, like, I suppose, in-universe timeline of, like, I'd say about 6 months to a year past Imbalance, like, if we're not tackling it here, I don't know when we're tackling it. Like, we have to tackle Azula at this instance, because to me it doesn't make a lot of sense to time skip ahead like 3-4 years and then Azula and Ursa talk. I think there's already been enough time where they sort of haven't talked since the search and beyond that, that pretty much coming up next, that has to be something you look at to come back to. It's just the way Smoke and Shadow ended, of very clearly Azula is going to try and mess with Zuko to try and form him into the leader she thinks the Fire Nation needs. That has to be something you tackle. Are we really saying that Zuko just is okay with Azula doing that for the next however many years without it being resolved? So that is something we have to return to. The story they're trying to tell overall across all the comics is Republic City. And we have a lot of the early steps, and I don't know how much more you can do without time skipping ahead to have more of the bigger steps happen. Because as we know, Imbalance was a sort of weaker comic because it, by definition going in, it couldn't have any solutions to the questions that it brought up. It literally just had to be the bringing up of the topics that would later be addressed more heavily in Korra. So I can't see a direct, like, we're still dealing with Cranefish Town, unless we're skipping ahead a few more years to a Cranefish Town that now includes more of the Water Tribe, and we're really addressing the idea of this can't just be an Earth Kingdom town, that we have to treat this as a separate nation, and that topic coming up. Proper, actual, we are about to transition Cranefish Town to being United Republic. That sort of talk has to come up eventually, but I think you have to skip ahead a few more years for that to happen, which means we have to get to the characters in their 20s, which is ultimately what I think most fans want. We want to see the characters who we care about the most in a time period of their life where, you know, it's unknown to us. We have like what, a single poster that features sort of canon art of the characters in their primes, basically. I suppose if you extend that a little bit more, some of the recent Inside Editions books, Legacy of the Fire Nation and a little bit of Avatar Legacy, do feature a little bit more of that time period. But the Old Friends poster, to me, is more of the signifier for like, yes, show us that stuff. Show us that Zuko, that Sokka going on like a mission together. You know, show us what's going on with like Aang and Katara's relationship at that point. Those are the things. In addition to obviously covering a lot of the ground you expect to be covered, as I bring up almost every time I talk about the potential story ideas. When does Aang find the other Sky Bison? Because we know he does. When does Zuko get Druk? They're just very basic animal things for two characters. Like, Zuko getting a dragon is a notable plot point. The return of Sky Bison other than Appa is a major plot point, for sure. And just in general, stuff like that. The other thing would be like Toph becoming more of a police officer. They're gradually getting there, but you know, we need to see more transition in that sense. But it's still very clearly a school at this point. So we have to, I think, definitely time skip a bit more before that happens. So we're left, I think, in this situation where, to me, one of the few stories you properly have left to tell with the characters still in the sort of North and South imbalance era is Azula. And if you're not telling that, you are literally just holding off that story. That story and sort of the unwillingness from certain writers to tell that story is what is holding us up from being actually able to transition into a more interesting time period in the comics. And until we do, it feels like we're going to be locked into this situation as we have right now of, wow, a solo book nobody asked for. And look, as much as I'm being critical of Katara and the Pirate Silver, I am excited for that book just to see if it does anything interesting. I think it'll have to all be done in its world building, because I don't think it's going to have the strength of character arc for Katara to potentially justify its existence purely on that side of things. So it's all going to be about the world building that they do surrounding what group of pirates she meets and what they're trying to accomplish, and if that means anything and connects into anything else. Because where they've said it, and the fact that we didn't know about this incident before, tells us it's not that important. So it's all on the basis of new world building stuff it introduces. And that's the problem that you have there. And that's why there's so many people asking for these bigger stories. When you see most fans, especially now that Avatar is so much more popular because it returned to Netflix, what are the questions people are asking? It is about, who did Sokka marry? Does Sokka have kids? Who is Su Yin's father? It's all of these questions basically surrounding the Avatar characters' lives in between the series. And in between the series, like actually in the middle of the series. Whereas we're like still all the way over here, right next to Avatar still. It's like a year or two past that, but we're still right there. We need to move much closer to the middle before I think the comics are going to get like properly interesting again. And they've, I think, really done themselves a disservice by deciding to have one of the only new books go all the way back over here into Avatar to tell another story. After, you know, Team Avatar Tales went down so well within the fandom, you decide to tell a giant short story. Basically, that just is a crazy decision to me. So, yeah, that's the thing. So, in summation, I suppose, for the comics, I think the next Korra comic announcement is going to be for a trilogy. In terms of the story, I think, like I said, I think they're either going to actually commit to going to the Fire Nation again, or we'll see a book that focuses more on what the Airbenders are doing with the Spirit Portal, and we might see more of the Spirit World. They're my obvious predictions. If it's not one of those two things, I think it probably will be more of something that we maybe didn't really see coming, in my mind, because it's the way they left stuff off, like the elections and so on. It's like, okay, so that's been put on hold for a little bit. So the next plot isn't going to be, let's start elections in the Earth Kingdom. That's what that whole plot in Ruins of the Empire was about. Like, highlighting that it was very soon, very quick to jump to that. So it can't be that. So that's why it has to be Fire Nation, or addressing maybe some of the stuff Turf Wars didn't address once more. Unless they are going to really surprise us and have a book that isn't as much Korra focused, and Mako gets to be in the spotlight for a bit, or whatever. I think what people would like would be stuff like a big book that just focuses on like Red Lotus backstory, but I don't think we're getting that. That to me maybe seems like something more for like a Korra novel type thing, but you know, that's speculation coming up in a second. For the next Avatar comic, I think from Faith Aaron Hicks and Peter Warman, if they're doing another book, I think it will be another one-shot. If it's a new creative team, I think that new creative team is going to do the next trilogy. That's where I stand on that. And with regards to the next book, like obviously the one-shot, it basically could be anything, but realistically you have to think like it's probably going to be an Aang, Zuko, or Toph like one-shot book, I guess. As for an Avatar comic trilogy, it kind of has to be the Azula story if you're continuing on from Imbalance, because I don't think it is the right option to jump into some sort of a direct sequel to Imbalance. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think the whole setup for North and South was that it's going to take a bit of time to allow all of that stuff to take place. So I don't think we're going to return to the Water Tribe plot, which really leaves the main plot point as the Smoke and Shadow stuff, which I think it is time to return to. So it has to be the Azula, Kiyi, Mei and Zuko stuff, because there's the other big thing. Can we finally have Mei and Zuko just get back together? Can we finally just have a book that once and for all, they're back together, it's a thing, and there's no need to worry about it. We can finally confirm to everyone that, like, they are together to the point where it is so clear that they are together that it confirms into the future that Mei and Zuko have Izumi, that Izumi is Mei's daughter. That's the sort of confirmation that we need from this, to the point where it's kind of like, when they get back together, to doubly confirm it, like, you borderline have to have, like, Zuko ask Mei to marry him or something like that, just to really double down on it. That's where I'm at this point, to just resolve it once and for all. Please, please do that. So I think most of the open plot points, in terms of direct continuation, have to be Fire Nation focused. If you are going to jump ahead, you can do pretty much whatever you want. I think it would probably be a mistake to have the next book be, I think, too focused on just the next step towards Republic City. I think you do have to have it be more of a character or world building plot than just get to Republic City thing. But yeah, that's where I stand on that. And then the other thing is the novels. Obviously, 11 days to Shadow of Kyoshi. Very, very exciting. So close. This is going to be the best Avatar thing that's happened this year for sure. I'm really excited because, of course, I'm going to do all the coverage again. Non-spoiler review, spoiler review, individual chapter analysis videos for every chapter in the book. I will be doing that again. We'll have podcast reviews as we go through it and stuff like that. So expect a lot of content for that. But at the same time, as soon as the book comes out, there will be a sort of demand for what's next for novels. Because there's no way it's only 2 books and we're done. We're never coming back to Avatar novels. So is there a plan for any continuation? I get the impression it probably would be a new author. That FCE is probably done with Avatar for now. He might come back eventually to do something else. But you know, what is next? Because I think the novels probably have the highest potential of anything to tell stories, because as we see, they can tell stories of sort of that slightly darker tone that I think people really want, because it's a novel. So I think that opens the door to maybe telling stuff like, you know, a novelization of like the events of the Air Nomad genocide, the backstories for all the Red Lotus characters, Iroh's full backstory as a novel. Or what I probably would prefer them to do is to actually have completely new and unique Avatar novels. So they're not set in Korra time period, they're not set in Avatar time period, they are their own thing. So Kyoshi ultimately is still sort of considered to be basically under the umbrella of ATLA because she was introduced in ATLA, and you know, it's just like a flashback type thing. What I'm talking about is like you just announce a series of novels, like say 3 or 4, and it's about either an Avatar from like way before Kyoshi, so right in the middle of that like you know 9,500 years that we know like nothing about, because like we know one is the first Avatar, and then like Avatar Salai is this Avatar we sort of know that is like before you know, Yang Chen and the Avatar Jafar guy, whose name we're going to get in the new novel. I already know it already because it was in the preview stuff on Amazon, but I won't spoil it for you guys. So there's a huge gap of time, like 9,000 years, to touch anything with these characters, and you can basically have an era of Avatar that doesn't relate to like anything at all. There's only some kind of general bigger world building things you sort of have to note in terms of like formation of cities or something like that, that you can have a completely blank canvas to play with and have basically a fully unique story that the Kyoshi novels kind of are, but they're much more closer to the general ATLA time period. Whereas if you set it more in the middle, like you set it like say 5,000 years ago, it's a very different world. That suddenly everything isn't exactly the way things were. Like we don't even need to actually have the Avatar as the main character. You can have just it's just a book that isn't the setting of Avatar. It's called Avatar, but the Avatar doesn't have to be the main character in this one. And that's what I would ultimately want, given that novels have proven to be a success. That show that Avatar works beyond just always connections to stuff that we already know. In that the Kyoshi novels are great because everyone was already like, yeah, I love Kyoshi because of the couple of things we found out about her. But how much popularity could they create around just a new Avatar series that is set like 5,000 years ago? So it's a whole new era of Avatar. It would basically be sort of like the third pillar, if you will, where we have ATLA time period, Korra time period, and then all of a sudden we go more ancient, sort of mid-ancient time period following this character or this Avatar, whatever way you want to do it. And that seems really, really cool to do. You'd probably, if it was Avatar focused, you'd probably want to do it like probably Fire Avatar is probably the way to go, given that we've now had Air Avatar with Aang, Water Avatar with Korra. We had Kyoshi as our Earth Avatar we've explored quite heavily. Whereas with Roku as the Fire Avatar, we went through his training fairly quickly. His training, by all accounts, went perfectly fine, smoothly, the exact way you expect the Avatar's training to go. What about one of the more unique Fire Avatars in history from thousands of years ago? That's a really good idea in my opinion, and have it just have some really cool world building stuff going on, and there's so many options that you have in my mind with that. So I don't know if there is a plan going forward, but again, we have to keep in mind the Netflix show is going to be this thing on the horizon that is going to be the focus of Avatar for a while, I suppose, when it comes out. So there has to be, in my mind, a plan for other content to continue while the Netflix show is on the air. And now, in the, like, I suppose year to 2 years before the premiere of the Avatar Netflix show, is the time to plan a lot of that stuff, to confirm to people this is the style of content that you will get while the show is on the air, and so on. Yeah, that's just where things are right now. I hate how little we know ultimately. That the novels are this amazing thing, but it's also this sort of like deal and like publishing deal, I guess, that we really know very little about. It's like 2 novels, the second one's just about to come out, and we have no sense for if they're continuing or not. The comics, which have been going since like what, 2011, 2012, have we ever had a time like this where we just know so little about the plans behind the scenes for what's next? That Katara and the Pirate Silver is just such a meme for Dark Horse and how bad at communication they are at this point. It's pretty crazy, and especially because like this is the 15-year anniversary of the franchise, and this year was shaping up to be really, really good if they delivered on just the same level of content they delivered on in previous years. But it's arguably turning into one of the weaker years that is being completely saved by the Shadow of Kyoshi. Because otherwise it's what? Ruins of the Empire Part 3, Katara and the Pirate Silver, and then Shadow of Kyoshi. And that's pretty much it for the main story content that we usually get. Whereas this year could have been like Ruins of the Empire, Korra Comic number 3 Part 1, Avatar Comic Trilogy number 7 Part 1, and maybe even Part 2. So we've gone from having like potentially like 5 maybe comics that might have come out this year to only having 2. And one of them is a one-shot thing that like is kind of like up in the air where most people feel about it at this stage. So it's very, very unusual, and I hope they can get back on track. I hope that the sort of lack of new stuff has partly just been because of delays because of the virus, and that, you know, they've had a lot of this sort of reprint stuff planned already, so that's been coming out and stuff like that, but they've just had to put the new stuff on hold. I really hope that that's the situation that we're in, and it isn't just that they literally don't have anything in the works. Because these are incredibly, you know, popular comics. Like, most of them do become bestsellers and stuff like that. There is a massive popularity behind them. As most people getting into the comics recently have noticed, it's kind of tricky to get your hands on physical copies of some of these books. Like the Search Library edition is like one of the rarest pieces of merchandise at this point until it gets reprinted again. And I guess until the Search Omnibus comes out in October, the Search Part 1 and the Library Edition are these like exceptionally rare pieces that, like, if you have them in your collection, you know, look into it, I suppose. It's maybe one of those things where, like, if you have the Library Edition, like, you know, consider selling it. You might be able to make some money. Just the demand for that book and the amount of people I've had coming to me saying that, like, I can't find the Search Library Edition anywhere, and so on. Which speaks to how popular the comics are, but you wouldn't really know it judging by Dark Horse's like releases of new books this year. Yeah, I'm just going to end the video there before I start repeating myself. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are basically on why there really hasn't been any information recently about new stuff, and what you think the next Avatar comic is going to be, the next Korra comic is going to be, and what your thoughts on the future of novels are after Shadow of Kyoshi. Will there be more, and if so, what is the path to take as the third Avatar novel to follow, basically, Shadow of Kyoshi? So that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.